The thunderous roar of aircraft engines shattered the pre-dawn silence. Over the English Channel on June 6, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder gripped the rail of the landing craft, his knuckles white against the cold. Metal as spray from the choppy waters soaked his uniform. Behind him, 225 Rangers of the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions prepared for what many knew could be their final mission. The cliffs of Point du Hoc loomed ahead. Through the morning mist, their limestone faces rising, 90 feet above the Norman coastline like ancient sentinels guarding Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Intelligence reports indicated that 6 massive 155mm guns, positioned atop these cliffs, could rain devastating fire upon both Utah and Omaha beaches, potentially dooming Operation Overlord before it truly began. General Dwight David Eisenhower had made the agonizing decision to proceed with the invasion, after Weatherman Group Captain James Martin Stagg predicted a brief window of improved conditions. The Supreme Allied Commander had carried the weight of postponing D-Day once already, and another delay could compromise the entire operation. The element of surprise, so crucial to success, hung by the thinnest of threads. As referenced in Stephen Ambrose's comprehensive work D-Day, June 6, 1944, the climactic battle of World War II, the complexity of coordinating 156,000 troops across multiple landing zones represented the largest amphibious invasion in military history. Major General Leonard Takei Jaro's 5th Corps faced the daunting task of securing Omaha Beach, a stretch of sand that would soon earn the grim nickname Bloody Omaha. The beach's natural defenses were formidable enough, bluffs rising 150 feet, numerous draws providing limited exit routes, and extensive tidal flats. But the Germans had transformed this landscape into a killing field. Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, had personally supervised the strengthening of coastal defenses. Throughout the spring of 1944, his Atlantic Wall boasted an intricate network of concrete bunkers, steel obstacles, barbed wire, and over 6 million mines. The German 852nd Infantry Division, though composed largely of Eastern European conscripts and older German soldiers, occupied well-prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire. The deception campaign, known as Operation Fortitude, had convinced German High Command that the main invasion would strike at Pas de Calais, where the English Channel narrowed to just 21 miles. General George Smith Patton Jr.'s fictional 1st United States Army Group maintained this illusion through elaborate radio traffic and dummy installations visible. 2 German reconnaissance aircraft, Colonel Rudder's Rangers, represented just one piece of a vast military chess game. Their mission seemed nearly impossible: scale the vertical cliffs under enemy fire, neutralize the gun battery, and hold their position until relief arrived. Failure would leave American forces on the beaches exposed to devastating artillery bombardment. The young faces around Rudder reflected a mixture of determination and fear that he recognized from his own combat experience. Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn from Brooklyn nervously checked his climbing equipment for the 3rd time. Private First Class Carl Bombara from Chicago whispered what might have been a prayer, or perhaps final words to a sweetheart back home. As the landing craft approached the base of Point du Hoc, German machine gun fire began chattering from concealed positions. Mortar rounds exploded in the surf, sending geysers of water and shrapnel skyward. The battle for Hitler's fortress Europe was about to begin in earnest. The first landing craft scraped against the Rockies shoreline at exactly 0-7-0-8 hours, 48 minutes behind schedule due to strong currents and enemy fire. Colonel Rudder leaped into waist-deep water, immediately followed by his Rangers, who struggled through the surf, carrying rocket-fired grappling hooks, toggle ropes, and lightweight ladders borrowed from the London Fire Brigade. German defenders atop Point du Hoc had not expected an assault directly against the cliffs. Most enemy troops were positioned to repel attacks from the beach approaches, but machine gun nests quickly reoriented to pour deadly fire down upon the Americans. Private First Class Sigurd Sundby from Minnesota became the first Ranger casualty, cut down by rifle fire as he attempted to set up a rocket launcher. The Rangers' innovative climbing equipment proved both blessing and curse. The rocket-fired ropes shot upward with impressive accuracy, but many became waterlogged during the rough channel crossing, making them too heavy to reach their targets. Others were cut by German defenders who emerged from concealed positions to slice through the lifelines. Sergeant First Class Leonard Lomel from New Jersey demonstrated the kind of leadership that would define the Ranger legacy. When the rope lines failed to hold under his weight, He gathered fragments of German barbed wire and fashioned crude climbing aids, hauling himself up the cliff face hand over hand. His example inspired others to attempt the seemingly impossible ascent. The German 716th Infantry Regiment had prepared for this moment. Captain Joseph Freeman commanded the coastal defense section responsible for Point du Hoc, and his men rolled hand grenades down the cliff face while firing rifles and submachine guns at the vulnerable climbers. The narrow beach below offered little cover except for scattered chunks of concrete blasted from German fortifications. By the pre-dawn naval bombardment, Lieutenant Colonel Rudder established his command post in a crater created by shells from the USS Satterlee, one of several destroyers providing close fire support. The warship's 5-inch guns hammered German positions with remarkable accuracy, forcing defenders to seek shelter in their deep concrete bunkers. However, the bombardment also created a double-edged situation while suppressing enemy fire. It filled the air with debris that made climbing even more treacherous. By only 15 hours, approximately half of Rudder's force had successfully reached the top of Point du Hoc. What they discovered would reshape their understanding of the mission's true importance. The massive gun emplacements the aerial reconnaissance had identified were empty. The Germans had removed the actual artillery pieces weeks earlier, replacing them with wooden decoys designed to fool Allied intelligence. Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn, who had worried about his equipment during the Channel crossing, now found himself in the surreal position of standing beside a convincing replica of a 155mm gun carved from telephone poles and painted to match genuine artillery pieces. The deception was so complete that even close inspection revealed careful attention to detail, including fake gun barrels and simulated recoil mechanisms. The discovery created an immediate tactical dilemma. The Rangers had achieved their primary objective, neutralizing the gun battery, but the threat those guns represented had been eliminated before they arrived. Meanwhile, the secondary mission of holding their position became increasingly dangerous as German counter-chaos began materializing from inland positions. First Sergeant Francis Wayne Cawthon from Tennessee organized defensive positions among the bomb craters that scarred the cliff top. The lunar landscape created by Allied bombing provided excellent defensive terrain, but it also concealed German soldiers who had survived the bombardment in reinforced bunkers. Small firefights erupted throughout the area as Rangers cleared each position methodically. The sound of battle from Omaha Beach, clearly audible across the 2 miles separating Point du Hoc from the main landing area, provided a constant reminder that the Rangers' mission extended beyond their immediate objectives. Every German soldier engaged at Point du Hoc represented one fewer defender, opposing the main assault forces struggling to establish their beachhead. While Colonel Rudder's force consolidated their positions atop Point du Hoc, Sergeant Leonard Lomel and Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn received permission to conduct a reconnaissance patrol inland. Their mission: locate the actual gun battery. That intelligence indicated must be positioned somewhere in the vicinity. The Norman countryside stretched before them in a patchwork of hedgerows, small fields, and scattered farmhouses. The infamous Bocage terrain that would plague Allied operations throughout the summer campaign presented its first tactical challenge. Each hedgerow, built up over centuries from stones cleared from fields and topped with dense vegetation, created natural defensive positions that could conceal entire squads of enemy soldiers. Lomel and Kuhn moved carefully along a dirt road leading southwest from Point du Hoc, their Thompson submachine guns ready for immediate action. The morning sun, now fully risen, cast long shadows that provided concealment but also created blind spots where German defenders might lurk. Every farm building and gate opening demanded careful observation before advancing. Approximately 800 yards from the cliff, the two Rangers discovered what Allied intelligence had failed to locate: the actual gun battery, carefully camouflaged in an apple orchard and positioned to fire on both Utah and Omaha beaches. 6 massive 155mm guns, each capable of hurling a 95-pound shell over 13 miles, sat in prepared positions with ammunition stockpiled nearby. The guns were unguarded. German crews had been withdrawn to defensive positions closer to the coast, leaving the artillery pieces vulnerable but intact. Lomel later recalled the surreal moment of standing before weapons that could have devastated the invasion fleet, knowing that their discovery represented one of the most significant intelligence coups of D-Day. The two sergeants immediately set about destroying the guns using thermite grenades designed specifically for disabling enemy equipment. The intense heat generated by the thermite compound melted critical components of each gun's breech mechanism, rendering the weapons permanently inoperable. When their supply of grenades was exhausted, they smashed optical sights and fire control equipment with rifle butts and entrenching tools. Meanwhile, back at Point du Hoc, Colonel Rudder faced mounting pressure from German counterattacks. The Wehrmacht's 252nd Infantry Regiment had moved elements forward to contain the American penetration, while Hitler's explicit orders demanded immediate recapture of all coastal positions. The Führer's Fortress Europe doctrine permitted no retreat from the Atlantic Wall. Captain Otto Riemann's Coastal Defense Company launched the first organized counterattack. At approximately 0930 hours, German infantry, supported by light mortars and machine guns, advanced across the cratered landscape in small groups, using shell holes for cover while maintaining communication through field telephones that had survived the bombardment. The Rangers' defensive positions benefited from the thorough preparation that characterized their training. Each man had memorized the layout of Point du Hoc from detailed sand tables and aerial photographs, enabling them to identify the most defensible positions quickly. The German fortifications, originally designed to repel seaborne assault, provided excellent protection when occupied by their attackers. Private First Class Karl Bombara, the young soldier from Chicago who had whispered prayers during the Channel crossing, distinguished himself by single-handedly holding a critical position against repeated German assaults. His Browning automatic rifle provided sustained firepower that broke up enemy formations before they could organize effective attacks against the main Ranger perimeter. The battle for Point du Hoc had evolved from a vertical assault against prepared positions into a complex infantry engagement that would test every aspect of Ranger training. The men who had climbed impossible cliffs under fire now faced the even more challenging task of holding their gains against determined counterattacks. While cut off from reinforcement or resupply, communications with higher headquarters remained sporadic due to damaged radio equipment and the challenging terrain that blocked signals. Colonel Rudder's force operated in relative isolation, knowing that relief depended on the success of operations at Omaha Beach, where the sound of heavy fighting continued throughout the morning. 2 miles southeast of Point du Hoc, the assault on Omaha Beach had devolved into a nightmare that threatened to derail Operation Overlord entirely. Major General Clarence Ralph Hubner's 1st Infantry Division, the legendary Big Red One, faced the most heavily defended sector of the entire invasion front. The combination of natural obstacles, extensive German fortifications, and tactical miscalculations created a killing field that would test American resolve to its breaking point. The pre-dawn naval bombardment, intended to neutralize German defenses, had largely missed its targets due to poor visibility and the decision to fire from maximum range. To avoid coastal artillery, most shells fell harmlessly inland, leaving the German 852nd Infantry Division's defensive positions intact. Colonel Dietrich Krase, commanding the division, had positioned his troops in mutually supporting strong points that created interlocking fields of fire across the entire beach. As referenced in Cornelius Ryan's authoritative account, The Longest Day, the German defensive plan for Omaha Beach represented military engineering at its most lethal. The WN-72 strongpoint, positioned on the bluff overlooking the Vierville Draw, contained a fearsome 88mm gun that could engage both naval vessels, a landing craft with devastating accuracy. The first wave of assault troops, primarily from the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, encountered immediate disaster. Landing craft navigating the rough seas had scattered across a wider front than planned, depositing soldiers far from their intended objectives. Many units lost essential equipment when landing craft broached in the surf or struck underwater. Obstacles. Company 8 of the 116th Infantry suffered particularly severe casualties. Captain Taylor Fellers watched helplessly as machine gun fire from the WN-72 position swept across his men before they could establish any defensive positions. Within minutes of landing, the company had lost over half its strength, with most survivors pinned down behind German beach obstacles or the minimal cover provided by a seawall. The German defensive strategy relied on concentrating fire at the waterline, where American troops would be most vulnerable. Machine gun nests positioned in the bluffs commanded excellent fields of fire across the tidal flats, while mortars pre-registered on likely landing zones could deliver immediate and accurate fire on a night concentration of troops. Staff Sergeant Robber sales from Virginia demonstrated the kind of individual heroism that would characterize the eventual American breakthrough. When his platoon leader was killed by sniper fire, Sales organized survivors from 3 different companies into an improvised assault group, using Bangalore torpedoes to breach barbed wire obstacles. He led a desperate charge up the Vierville draw that captured a key German position. The situation became so desperate that Rear Admiral John Leslie Hall, Jr., commanding the naval forces supporting Omaha Beach, seriously considered recommending evacuation of the beachhead. His destroyers, including USS McCook and USS Carmack, had moved dangerously close to shore to provide direct fire support, but even point-blank naval gunfire could not dislodge well-positioned German defenders. Colonel George Arthur Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment provided leadership that became legendary in American military history. Moving among his scattered units under intense fire, Taylor reportedly shouted, "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." His words, though perhaps apocryphal, capture the desperate determination required to transform disaster into victory. The breakthrough began with small groups of American soldiers, led by junior officers and non-commissioned officers, began infiltrating the German defensive positions through unguarded areas. The bocage terrain that had seemed so threatening from the beach actually provided concealment for these improvised assault groups once they reached the base of the bluffs. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Draper Kinham, despite suffering serious wounds from German shrapnel, organized a coordinated attack against the WN-72 strongpoint. His mixed force of Rangers, infantry, and engineers used concentrated fire from multiple directions to suppress German defenders, while assault teams worked their way around the flanks of the position. The capture of WN-72 marked the turning point in the battle for Omaha Beach. Once American forces controlled the high ground, they could provide covering fire for follow-up waves and begin the systematic reduction of remaining German positions. The beachhead that had seemed doomed by mid-morning was finally secure by early afternoon. By 1400 hours on June 6th, the situation at Point du Hoc had become increasingly precarious. Colonel Rudder's force, now reduced to approximately 90 effective fighters from the original 225 Rangers, faced mounting pressure from German counterattacks while running critically low on ammunition, and medical supplies. The promised relief from Omaha Beach had failed to materialize on schedule due to the fierce fighting that had characterized the main landing. The 5th Ranger Battalion, originally tasked with reinforcing Point du Hoc if the assault succeeded, had instead been diverted to support the desperate struggle for the Vierville draw. Every available unit was committed to breaking through the German defensive line that threatened to contain the entire beachhead. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lomel and Sergeant Jack Kuhn returned from their reconnaissance mission with news that would reshape understanding of the Rangers' contribution to D-Day. Their destruction of the concealed gun battery had eliminated a threat that could have devastated both invasion beaches. The 6 155mm guns, positioned to deliver enfilade fire along the length of Omaha Beach, would have turned an already difficult assault into an impossible bloodbath. German counterattacks intensified as Wehrmacht commanders recognized the strategic importance of recapturing Point du Hoc. The high ground provided observation over both American beaches and potential artillery positions that could disrupt ongoing operations. Colonel Meyer of the 916th Grenadier Regiment committed his reserve company to a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the depleted Ranger positions. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, demonstrating tactical sophistication that surprised many American commanders who had underestimated German defensive capabilities. Infantry approached through communication trenches that connected the various bunker complexes, while supporting elements provided covering fire from positions that had been overlooked. During the initial assault, Private First Class Carl Bombara, whose Browning automatic rifle had already proven decisive in earlier engagements, anchored the defense of the most critical sector. His position, carved from a bomb crater and reinforced with concrete fragments from destroyed German fortifications, commanded approaches from both the inland area and the coastal road. When German infantry attempted to infiltrate through a damaged bunker complex, Bombara's accurate fire broke up the assault and forced the attackers to seek alternative routes. The medical situation had become desperate. Rangers wounded during the cliff assault had been joined by casualties from the ongoing firefights, but the unit's limited medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Corpsman James Earl Parker from Tennessee, performed surgery under combat conditions, using German medical equipment captured from overrun positions to treat American wounded. Colonel Rudder established communication with the destroyer USS Satterlee at approximately 15:30 hours, requesting immediate naval gunfire support to break up the German counterattacks. The ship's 5-inch guns provided devastating fire that caught German assault formations in the open, but the proximity of friendly forces limited the destroyer's ability to engage targets effectively. The Rangers' tactical position benefited from thorough preparation and exceptional training, but their strategic situation remained tenuous, cut off from resupply and reinforcement, with casualties mounting and ammunition running low. They represented a classic example of elite forces operating beyond the range of conventional support. Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder faced the most difficult decision of his military career. Standing orders required him to hold Point Du Hoc until relieved, but the cost in Ranger lives was becoming prohibitive. His men had accomplished their mission, destroying the gun battery that threatened the invasion beaches, but continuing to hold an increasingly untenable position served no clear strategic purpose. The sound of renewed fighting from Omaha Beach provided constant reminder that the Rangers' sacrifice was part of a larger struggle, whose outcome remained uncertain. American forces had established a foothold on Hitler's Atlantic Wall, but the beachhead remained vulnerable to counterattack. Every German soldier engaged at Point Du Hoc represented one fewer defender available to oppose the main assault forces. As evening approached, Colonel Rudder made the decision that would define his legacy. The Rangers would hold their positions regardless of cost, maintaining pressure on German forces and preventing the enemy from concentrating against the main beachhead. Their sacrifice would contribute to the broader success of Operation Overlord, even if you would recognize their specific contribution to victory. As darkness fell over the Norman coast on June 6, 1944, the Rangers at Point Du Hoc prepared for what many believed would be their final night. Colonel Rudder's decimated force had shrunk to fewer than 80 effective fighters, many of whom carried wounds that would have warranted evacuation under normal circumstances. The combination of German counterattacks, limited medical supplies, and complete isolation from friendly forces had created a desperate tactical situation. The German 916th Grenadier Regiment, reinforced by elements of the 726th Infantry Regiment, prepared for a major night assault designed to recapture Point Du Hoc. Before American reinforcements could arrive, Colonel Meyer had received explicit orders from General Marks, commanding the 84th Corps, that the high ground must be retaken at any cost. The strategic importance of the position had become clear to German commanders, who recognized its value for artillery observation and coastal defense. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lommel organized the defense of the most exposed sector, where German infiltration attempts had been most persistent throughout the day. His position, anchored around a damaged German bunker that provided excellent fields of fire, became the focal point for enemy probing attacks designed to identify weak points in the American perimeter. The Balkans terrain that characterized the Norman countryside created ideal conditions for night operations. German infantry, many of whom were veterans of the Eastern Front, used their experience in close-quarters combat to approach Ranger positions through hedgerows and communication trenches. The sound of their movement, barely audible over the distant rumble of artillery from Omaha Beach, provided the only warning of impending attacks. Private First Class Carl Bombara, whose automatic rifle had proven decisive in earlier engagements, faced his greatest test as German assault troops concentrated against his section of the perimeter. The darkness negated much of his weapons' effectiveness at longer ranges, forcing him to wait until enemy soldiers were within grenade-throwing distance before opening fire. His disciplined fire control prevented German infiltration while conserving precious ammunition. The medical situation had deteriorated beyond critical. Corpsman James Earl Parker continued treating wounded Rangers with supplies scavenged from German first aid kits, but the lack of proper surgical instruments and sterile conditions limited his effectiveness. Several seriously wounded men required immediate evacuation to hospital ships offshore, but no helicopter or boat evacuation was possible given the tactical situation. Colonel Rudder maintained communication with higher headquarters through intermittent radio contact with the USS Satterlee. The destroyer's captain, Commander Frank Andrew Haslam, provided moral support and occasional naval gunfire, but the proximity of German and American forces limited his ability to engage targets effectively. One missed barrage could devastate the Rangers as easily as their enemies. The night assault began at approximately 2200 hours, with coordinated attacks from 3 directions. German infantry, supported by light mortars and machine guns, advanced through the cratered landscape using tactics refined through years of combat experience. Their approach demonstrated professional competence that impressed even veteran Rangers, who had trained extensively in night fighting techniques. The initial German probe targeted the southeastern corner of the Ranger perimeter, where bomb damage had created numerous concealed approaches. A squad of Wehrmacht infantry succeeded in penetrating the outer defensive line, before encountering Sergeant First Class William Lloyd Sivison from Iowa, whose quick reaction and accurate rifle fire alerted other defenders to the threat. The main German assault struck the northern face of Point du Hoc, where Colonel Rudder had positioned his strongest remaining unit. The attack featured coordinated use of covering fire, a maneuver that pushed American defenders back from their initial positions. For nearly an hour, the outcome of the battle remained in doubt as German soldiers occupied portions of the clifftop fortifications. Staff Sergeant Robert Stephen Fruehling from Wisconsin led a counterattack that proved decisive in restoring the Ranger perimeter. His improvised assault group, composed of walking wounded and support personnel, used grenades and close-quarters fighting to eject German infantry from captured positions. The hand-to-hand combat that followed demonstrated the individual courage and unit cohesion that characterized elite American forces. The German withdrawal began around midnight, as enemy commanders recognized that their assault had failed to achieve decisive results. The cost and casualties had been severe for both sides, but the Rangers maintained control of Point du Hoc despite overwhelming odds. Their successful defense ensured that German forces could not use the high ground to observe or interdict American operations on the invasion beaches. The pale light of June 7, 1944, revealed the full extent of the Rangers' ordeal at Point du Hoc. Colonel James Earl Rudder conducted his first complete casualty count since the landing 36 hours earlier, discovering that his force had been reduced to just 42 effective fighters from the original complement of 225 men. The price of holding Hitler's Atlantic Wall had been measured in individual heroism and collective sacrifice. The relief that Rangers had awaited since D-Day morning finally appeared at 0800 hours, in the form of elements from the 5th Ranger Battalion and the 116th Infantry Regiment. Lieutenant Colonel Max Schneider, commanding the 5th Rangers, later described his shock at discovering the condition of Rudder's survivors, bearded, hollow-eyed, and bearing wounds that would have incapacitated lesser soldiers. The strategic significance of the Rangers' mission became clear only through post-battle analysis conducted by Allied intelligence officers. The destruction of the concealed gun battery by Sergeants Lommel and Kuhn had eliminated a threat that could have transformed D-Day from costly victory into catastrophic defeat. The 6 155mm guns, positioned to deliver devastating enfilade fire along Omaha Beach, would have made the already difficult assault nearly impossible. German prisoners captured during the relief operations provided additional confirmation of the mission's importance. Obergefreiter Hans Müller of the 726th Infantry Regiment revealed that his unit had received explicit orders to recapture Point du Hoc at any cost, demonstrating the tactical value that Wehrmacht commanders placed on the position. The German commitment of significant forces to contain 90 American Rangers had prevented those troops from reinforcing more critical sectors. The bocage fighting that would characterize the entire Normandy campaign had begun. At Point du Hoc, where Rangers encountered the tactical challenges posed by centuries-old hedgerows and stone walls, the lessons learned during their desperate defense would inform American operations throughout the summer of 1944. As infantry units learned to navigate terrain that favored defensive operations, medical evacuation of wounded Rangers began immediately upon the arrival of relief forces. The destroyer USS Satterlee, which had provided fire support throughout the battle, served as a floating hospital for casualties requiring immediate surgery. Corpsman James Earl Parker, who had performed miracles with limited supplies, finally received the medical support necessary to save lives that might otherwise have been lost. The psychological impact of the Rangers' success extended far beyond their tactical contribution to Operation Overlord. Word of their achievements spread quickly through American units, still fighting to expand the Normandy beachhead, providing inspiration for soldiers facing their own desperate battles against determined German resistance. Colonel Rudder's recommendation for decorations reflected the extraordinary nature of individual performances during the battle. Staff Sergeant Leonard Lomel received the Distinguished Service Cross for his destruction of the gun battery, while Private First Class Carl Bombara earned the Silver Star for his defense of critical positions. Nearly every survivor qualified for Purple Heart medals, testament to the intensity of combat they had endured. The German perspective on the battle, revealed through captured documents and prisoner interrogations, demonstrated respect for American fighting abilities that would influence enemy tactics throughout the campaign. Wehrmacht commanders recognized that elite American units represented a qualitatively different threat from the garrison troops they had expected to face. During the invasion, the transformation of Point du Hoc from German stronghold to American victory symbol occurred with remarkable speed. Within hours of the relief, engineers began converting captured German fortifications into observation posts and artillery positions that would support ongoing operations. The high ground that Rangers had seized at such terrible cost became a permanent fixture in the Allied defensive line, as the survivors of the 2nd and 5th Ranger battalions were evacuated for medical treatment and rest. Their legacy was already being written in the broader history of D-Day. The vertical assault against impossible odds, the destruction of the hidden gun battery, and the desperate defense against counterattacks had demonstrated that elite forces, properly trained and courageously led, could achieve objectives that conventional wisdom deemed impossible. The heroes of Point du Hoc had earned their place in military history through individual acts of valor and collective determination. Their success, measured not merely in tactical objectives achieved, but in strategic threats eliminated, contributed to the liberation of Western Europe and the ultimate defeat of Nazi Germany. The dawn of June 7, 1944, marked not just their relief from an impossible mission, but the beginning of victory in the largest and most consequential military operation in human history.